Nobody wants to be in a single-family house with a white picket fence. And that's why you're seeing all the different housing types around town, is to try to, we have such a disparity, especially below the 120% AMI, really below 80% AMI, and there's no way to deliver that without additional help and support. So for us, we are always looking for innovative ideas. We're willing to talk to anybody. We're trying to improve our permitting system, and have the conversations with the community. And I think sometimes people fear the relationships between the cities and the developers. Well, the developers are the one that really have the capital, and they're the ones that are going to build housing. So and the conversations are not, I always tell our teams, like, we're not trying to give the farm away. We want to make sure that we kind of hold to our tenets and values of what we're trying to do and how to build a city. But if someone's coming in and they want to spend a couple $100,000 in an ADU in their backyard, or if they want to spend $150 million plus to build a big 350 unit project, and they're doing it in the right place and in accordance to the codes, our job is to figure out how they do it, what they need to build, and the timeline it's going to take, so they can make the business decisions that they need to do that. But it's a philosophical approach that your entire organization needs to be behind to do that.
Yep. And from the state's perspective, trying to make sure we're doing our part on technical assistance, model codes, simplifying things for local government who do want to do it, but like, look, I can barely keep our doors open because we have a little bit of a local government financing challenge here in the state. So making it easier for them. And so, because I think there's an assumption it's just, more progressive places who are, no, we have some, all range of political persuasion, I think, in some of these communities. And some of them are doing that is not the barrier. It's who's on the ground, what partnerships you have, and your willingness to actually try it. So it is pretty exciting. So let's talk about the public-private partnership. So sometimes people are like, just right to the last comment there, the state and the city are not building. Somebody else does the building, right? And so what are those key elements of making those private and public partnerships work? And I do want to touch on financing, but before we get to financing, what are those other things? I'm going to start off with Deborah, because you're our private sector person here. So, when we say partnership, what's your ideal? That makes a project pencil and work for you.
So there needs to be three different aspects to the private-public partnership. There needs to be a municipality having a city sitting at the table that's actually helping you through the process, and that is key. They're the ones that are actually potentially getting funding. They might be the ones that are helping to work with utility companies, because it might not be the city's utility companies. They are also the ones that are putting it on the agenda to make sure that it gets in front of city council. And so these are critical aspects. The second piece is usually having a nonprofit partner. The nonprofit partner allows, in many cases, if there is subsidies that are involved, which are not always the case, but if there is, there's usually some sort of deed restriction or a community land trust. And that nonprofit is responsible for ensuring that the longevity and the perpetuality of those homes are intact, and that those homeowners and home buyers understand the process of reselling their home. And then the third aspect is the actual partnership with the builders or the developers. Usually on the building side, we know how to work with the city and put in a permit and make sure that we have the certificate of occupancy, and that we make sure that we are building these units so they are meeting fire and safety and securing that. I do think that we've had, I have examples of doing private-public partnerships across the state. I do think that there's different ways that you can do this. You can do it through a connection of working with the state lands. There's an opportunity here in Bend through the Department of State Lands that funds the Common School Fund. And this is an opportunity where school teachers are going to actually have an opportunity to have a priority to actually live in these communities. That's an example. utilizing the faith-based communities. There's many different faith-based opportunities where we worked with St. Vincent de Paul, and they had a piece of property. We helped them to build some units there, and they're now having an opportunity to be the first step to be able to get into homeownership. And a third option would be working with the city of Sutherland. They're actually working with employers. So there's a lot of defunct timber operations down there. There are some real need though for some of the manufacturing down there. And they are putting together a 72 unit. And it is really the city that's taking the initiative to build this. And the employees are coming in, and they're basically coming in with their employment dollars, so HR dollars, to support and give down payment assistance or getting them and purchasing actual units for their employees.
So I view public-private partnerships on kind of different levels of things. You have the financial arrangements. We have an affordable housing fund that we actually do a competitive process to award those funds, and a lot of times there's deed restrictions and contractual arrangements around that. Public-private partnerships, to me, I'll use an example of when I was talking about realigning our capital programs to do that. We had the ability to bring in, I think when it was 240 units of affordable housing, but there was about 2,000 feet of sewer line that needed to be built to just get to the front door of this, and they could not do that. So that, again, this is where, from a city, we got a bird in the hand. What do we need to do? We pull our entire team together. And when we ask questions, can we realign our CIP? Because that project's on the books, but it wasn't planned, maybe, 10 years out. Should we rearrange our CIP to get the infrastructure there because this developer wants to go? And we can have those conversations with our council and say, do you want to do that? Public-private partnership can go to, simple things as, one of the kind of the best practices we do as a city is if we have large developments, like I know Deb's group was involved in one of the expansion projects that had a lot of affordable housing tied to it. It's as simple as meeting regularly with their teams to work through the issues to get them through the entitlement process. So we have weekly, bi-weekly meetings sometimes with some of these large organizations to make sure that we're logically working through the issues, figuring out infrastructure mitigation, timing, and all that kind of stuff to make things happen. So you have all these various levels of relationships that you can use to do that. And so and again, that's that team approach that you really, really need to think about if you really want to make this a success.
Mm-hmm. Sean or Mary Kyle? Nope. So,
I do want to add maybe just one point that I think the state is kind of entering into new territory in light of a lot of these conversations around actually getting the housing built on the ground. Because what we observed, right, we see how functional these types of partnerships can be, and we have so many agencies. We have an alphabet soup of agencies, many of whom touch the development process, right? And haven't historically worked together, talked together, right? If you're, say, developing a housing project, you have to talk to half a dozen agencies, right, to address various problems. And why isn't there better coordination at the state to facilitate housing production? I think that's one of the biggest roles that we can take and build capacity for, especially through the new Housing Accountability and Production Office.
yeah, and to have a statewide office that, because this is so locally based, to have an office like that we now have under the legislation that was passed just this past year, it is a place to go not only for help, but for cajoling and be like, you can do that. They're doing it. You can do that, right? So, that approach before we have to be like, no, you have to do it, right? There's a spectrum of how to encourage, people optimizing what is available. For sure, in their communities. Let's talk about getting back a little bit to middle housing. This is going to change forever my neighborhood if we allow this. What have you seen on the ground or heard of where middle housing is actually very much in sync with what the locals want, and so this fear is being reduced because of the things that are happening? This idea of like local variation while we are trying to promote more housing. What are you seeing on the ground, and what are any war stories about, like, we did this and everything was fine?
Plenty of war stories.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I guess I'll jump in. I think a lot of it is, it's fear-based out of it, you know, I joke that we've been through so many different apocalypses in the city of Bend, on different things, and we've always survived. But there's that, we constantly get concerns about, oh, there's this 6-unit, you know, project going in, parking on my street's gonna become a disaster, the world's gonna end, and we're like, we understand, but I think it's gonna be okay. And we're like, in tangent with this, we just updated our parking code so that we have different management tools, because we know it's gonna be, you know, we know there's gonna be more interactions for a limited kind of space of inventory. But, you know, I know we always have questions like, what's more important, another housing unit on the ground or a place to park your car, right? And I think those are the difficult conversations you need to have with the community. And also, you also want to attack it from different angles as well, of saying, if you're an employer, like, how many people have you talked to where the city's in the same boat as you? We have put offers out to people. They're really excited to come here, and then all of a sudden they take that next step and look at the housing market, and then they have to withdraw because like, there's no way I can move here. That's an impact. That's a community-wide thing that we need to figure out as a group. So just having sensible conversations with them, also making sure that you have conversations of, this is why we're doing what we're doing with the community. We're working on different communication packages that we can send out to the community just so they understand what the Oregon land use is intending to do, why they're seeing the change in the community. But you just have to be persistent, I guess, and know these conversations are never gonna stop, but we're trying to do it for the right reasons. We're trying to, it's not a guilt story, but it's like, I have 2 daughters that are out and now in college. I don't think they're ever gonna come back, but I would sure like them to have the possibility to think about, if they wanted to come back, that they actually could do that and they could live and grow in this town. I think everybody would want that. So how do we do that? And yeah, those choices aren't easy, but that's a conversation that I think the community needs to have.
So I might take the opposite of what you actually asked here. Obviously, this is the basis of NIMBYism, right? And what is holding up some of these and the challenges with the NIMBYism. I'm going to give an example of something that we're seeing actually in a neighboring state. This is something that the state of Washington does, and I think it's something that we could look at federally. They actually allow hearing examiners to be responsible for approving preliminary plats. And it still requires the planning commissions and also the city councils to put together the comprehensive plan and the development codes. So they're responsible for setting the tone. But what they've done is they've taken out the quasi-judicial situation where you have neighbors, you know, really pushing the city council members or planning commissions, elected officials to vote no on these developments when they've actually done everything that the comprehensive plan and the development code says is okay. I think that this could be a really great way to actually expedite and streamline when we use this, and it's not required in Washington, but it's allowed in Washington if cities want to take advantage of it. It speeds up the process by a minimum of 60 days. Because you're not waiting for the next city council meeting, you're not waiting for the timing and the appeal. There's an appeal process, but it starts immediately as the decision, and they're still bound by the conditions of approval.
I think I was going to share a perspective that we've been hearing some stories from work we've been doing from cities that would like to see more of this, but they have barriers to this. So I'm thinking of a particular private home builder who builds in northeastern Oregon, our Frontier County area, who had been building more upscale or more expensive housing, but saw a need in his community for that more workforce and affordable housing and is building it, but also saw there's a problem with a lack of workforce in his community, and what he was incorporating into his developments was some prefabricated housing, you know, built off-site and assembled on-site. So he established a training program for high school workers who are now building with him, and also established a manufacturing facility to manufacture prefabricated housing. There's opportunities for public input and partnership with that, and I know he knows that he can build more housing if he had infrastructure funding, so back to that same theme. But that is a great public-private partnership type thing that's hitting on a lot of the issues that are coming up in many places at workforce, the lack of enough workers in the construction industry, and including skilled workers, and these new, more innovative housing types that can be built more quickly and assembled on site more quickly. And he's building in communities where they want to see more of this and they really need it. So it's not the NIMBY issue, but he needs some other things.
Yep. Yep, for sure. So we have a few minutes to take questions. So think about if you have a question. I'm going to ask one more question here for our panel. What do you need to open up financing? It's not just about more money. Is there something about the nature of the middle housing development that is impeding the finances or the home ownership? I feel like the lot division has helped a little, but well, it's helped a lot actually. So are there other things for financing, getting to scale? I mean, what are those challenges? Money obviously needs to be available, but.
Yeah, in the middle housing, I think it has to do a lot with what you're just seeing in the macro kind of economics. It's interest rates.
Yeah, interest rates.
It's inflation costs, things that we don't control. The other things that we're really starting to hear more about, and our hearts go out to everyone down in California and LA of what's going on. Insurance is becoming a major topic of conversation. I was at the EOI conference back in New York in the spring of last year, and they said the top two things that are rising, and this is where developers and financing groups come together and talk about what's going on with the market. And they go, one of the top two things that's emerging as problems are operating costs for small to large developments. And the two biggest things are insurance and then the other macroeconomic things. But they're also talking about climate now is becoming a major lending risk. And so what are your building materials going to be? And so the nature of development is changing rapidly. And so it's not only now, you have people not only thinking about the front end of what's my initial capital cost, but also there's issues in that operating model as well. And even with, I know on the affordable housing projects, there's limitations on what you can use for operating funds. And so if you get a doubling of insurance cost, that's a difficult situation, especially with all the kind of the financing stacks and things that occur. So it's looking at the whole model, to make sure that you can set the table appropriately. But it's interesting because I've been in this a long time. I was on the private side with one of the largest home builders in the country, and it was a different conversation 10, 15 years ago than it is now on how this works.
So I would say from a federal level, the infrastructure piece, allowing infrastructure for states to actually take advantage of infrastructure, and it can be a loan that can be paid back, but tying it to housing for the states. And then the second item that we really haven't talked about today, but as interest rates continue to be high for our first-time home buyers, at a federal level, if there could be a buy down on these interest rates. And it could be similar to how the USDA direct loan is set up, where there's actually, I think it's a 3-year time period beyond. So it's like a 33-year loan that they end up paying they end up paying that back at the end. Or if they were to sell the loan. And that would allow first-time home buyers, so requiring that first-time home buyers, but it would allow them to get into these middle housing.
Another area I forgot to mention was, especially in mountain towns with the high cost of living, there's been some struggle around, a lot of programs are set up for 80% AMI or lower. We're pushing that band more up to the 120, and so there's some limitations on what funding we can go through, because we're trying to attack this problem at all levels. But even if you're making 120% area income, it's hard. To give you an idea, I thought I saw a stat. Don't quote me on this. I think the average rental rate now for like a 2-bedroom apartment, it was around $2,400, right? I mean, just imagine how do you do that? And I think buy down assistance programs. Anything you can do on interest rate buy downs. I would say it's the kitchen sink that we need to throw at this if we really want to turn the dial on production. Especially at the areas where we need it, because Ben's unique. We have a lot of money flowing into this town. So I think the upper tiers, they're doing just fine, but it is really compressing the issues and the struggles for kind of that 120 and under.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing too, I'll just throw this in here on the question of like infrastructure and public facilities. There is one area that I think there's a systemic problem that we're going to need to think about critically and strategically and address, which is the fact that, so many cities are facing very significant budget shortages and deficit for the ongoing maintenance of infrastructure into the long term. And a lot of that owes to, if you have big infrastructure network with very few taxpayers, you have less money to pay for the maintenance of that infrastructure, right? Middle housing provides a really good opportunity to start addressing some of that deficit and use infrastructure more efficiently, which we're going to need to build like sustainable city finances ongoing into the future. But one of the things is like our methodologies for estimating impact are kind of still stuck pre-middle housing, where we kind of assume one unit is one unit is one unit, and it's going to have one unit of impact, when we know that middle housing does use infrastructure more efficiently, right? Yeah. People drive less, they use less water, use less energy, all these different types of things that aren't really accounted for, and so our methodologies kind of need to catch up.
To put that in perspective, between, I love fun facts, but between kind of the recession and COVID, about a 10-year period, the city invested about $1 billion in infrastructure that was publicly funded by the community. So I always like to pause on that number. That is for a town of 100,000 people. We put in $1 billion worth of infrastructure, and a lot of it is to continue with growth. A lot of it is to continue going back to on the federal level. We have a lot of federal mandates. We had a significant investment in our water system because of a cryptosporidium requirement that we had to do. So it's layered and all for good reason, but it really, and we're starting to hit that point where we're kind of hitting that ceiling of how much can we ask the community to do to be a part of this conversation. We need help and assistance to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Does anyone have a question? If you do, you got some experts up here. Yes.
It's more of a statement. Vaughn, sorry, can you wait for, there we go, for the live stream. Thank you.
Sorry. My question is, or comment is, the City of Bend has taken the lead on timing for payment of system development charges and extending it out, or impact fees like other states may call them. I think this could be something that could be done at a statewide level for all states, Western states, where they push out the timing, because then you're not paying interest on a development loan for those system development charges or other infrastructure. So if Bend could talk about that, Russ, that would be great.
I'd love to. So one of the programs that we've had, and again, this is working with our council to try to figure out how to do it, and Karn is exactly right in terms of sometimes on these major projects, you could have system development charges in the realm of $500,000 to $1 million. So think of and then you're on an 18-month to 2-year timeline. So think of your construction loan and interest payment on that. So what we've done is, and we've phased it in, is we are allowing developers to defer payment of that until certificate of occupancy, which has really been done thing. And there's an interesting conversation here in terms of working with the state, because there was some legislation that was coming up that was exploring this idea, and the first thing we heard about that, and this is how we interact with the state, was they were thinking about doing it can we do it at closing? And that's when we immediately raised our hand and said, that we don't agree with that idea at all. The last thing you want to do is introduce a local jurisdiction into a financial transactional arrangement outside of what we can control. So we don't move at this speed and pace of how closings work on a house, right? So can we back that up to the CO? We're interested in this, but just those little tweaks can make something from a kind of a good idea that doesn't work very well to something that is implementable, easy to understand, easy to regulate. We can create our systems with our permitting software where we can make sure that we can capture those gates at the right time, that we can allow this to open up and even have these conversations in the first place. But we always appreciate, like when we always come to the state, when we start hearing about certain policies, that ability to have those good conversations, like totally on board with you. Can you tweak it a little bit? Because we think if you just do that, then this might really work. And it really helps us to have those relationships.
And that is so important, because you don't want to pass something and then on the ground people are like, you just screwed that up. Thanks very much, right? So we need that input. Rep. Gamba will be back for his legislation this year about just that. Encouraging. This is about trust. This is encouraging local jurisdictions to do that. And the state, his legislation will say on occupancy, holding back on STC charges until occupancy, and that the state will have a fund to back you up if for some reason someone stiffs you. I tend to think, because I'm a positive person, that's a rare case. But if you're the city and you're like, I don't know what we're going to do here, so there will be legislation for the state having to put up some money as a backstop, so more cities will do that, so that upfront cost is taken off the table.
Yeah, because we look at it a lot of times like, do you want us spending a lot of administrative time tracking these programs, or do you want our staff actually reviewing your permits?
Yes.
Right? Those
Absolutely
those are the trade-offs in this, and I think putting staff on permits is probably a better idea.
Agreed. Thank you. Other questions? We have about 5 more minutes. And my speed date question for the crowd will be, if you could have one thing from the federal government, what would it be? So, because we're going to pass that along to our new administration. Yes? Oh,
Clayton Crowhurst, North Housing Alternatives. I think, Russ, you kind of hinted at this one on the rental housing side of subsidy and funding really falling short of funding units in that 80 to 120 range. And even the state's LIFT program on the homeownership side has been doing a much better job of that, but I think on the rental housing side is still there's some work to go. So I'm just curious, like at the table there, what maybe federal opportunities and especially state opportunities we're seeing to make up that distance, especially in resort towns and areas like Bend on the rental housing side of how do we bridge that gap, get from 60 up to 120?
I'll try to answer that. What's interesting, because we've been operating under a little bit of a mantra of like, any unit is a good unit, because the only thing that is penciling with traditional kind of financing is kind of the mid to higher end stuff, and that's what you see built around town. But the goal is we're still undersupplied. Well, let's get these new units online, and then we may be people moving out of the older stock into this newer stock, and then we can get them in. That's not the best solution to the problem. The best solution problem is to build housing that can actually get to that. For me, I've had a lot of conversations with our affordable housing teams and the affordable housing developers. The funding stack that they need to go through, it is crazy to try to get a financial package put together, and just how the tax, the tax program works and the credits and all that. You're asking at the federal level. I mean, it's like, there's got to be a simpler way to do that, where you can get the money into the hands of the developers quicker and faster, and not have to have 10 different programs try to figure out how to fund housing. That would be, because the existing environment, it is super challenging to not only line up because we have conversations. Another trick of the trade is you get with the developers and you say, what is your timeline? And you ask questions like, where are your critical funding milestones, and what do you need for those milestones? And then you reverse engineer the schedule to say, this is even feasible or it's not, because some of the best information we give in developers, you don't have a shot at making your timeline. So let's look at option B. But if you do, this is what needs to happen on the way to hit that milestone, so you can pull a permit and get your funding in 12 months. So if we know that whole timeline, then we can work with them. But when you hear the stories, my head just goes, there's got to be an easier way to do this. I don't know what it is, but this seems a little crazy if we're serious about building housing.
yeah. The only thing I will say is, as a state, it will come down to resources. We have made an intentional commitment to doing our part for getting housing built at lower income, the 60 or 80%. And we have a big gap, right? And so you're hearing from legislators wanting to come in with what they're, more of the workforce housing supports, whether they're, the loans and the revolving loan funds and things like that. We need some additional resources on the table to make those things actually be available. And that's my big ask for the federal government. Like, just give us more money. Really, I mean, you can deficit spend. That at the end of the day, we know what works, simplify it, and get us more money. And the other item for me is also more backsteps on the insurance side that I think can only really be solved at the federal level. So one more question. I think, Katie, you had a question? And then the team here, you get final comments and your federal wish list that we'll pass along to the Trump administration.
Yeah, this is my federal wish list, playing off of what he just asked. So we've raised about $1 million from the private sector to invest in workforce housing, based from employers who understand. 91% of them in Central Oregon say that housing is the #1 reason they can't attract and retain employees. Can we as Western states band together and get the federal government to raise the amount of AMI that qualifies for charitable giving? Because if we're all constrained by giving to 80% and less, there is a bunch of us that have been pinched out of the mid-market, middle class, that will never have a pathway to home ownership. And we can't, we're strapped because even the private sector funds that we raise to invest are constrained by that 80 and below. It would be great to at least get up to 100 or 120 of AMI. So maybe we can all go and ask that of our new government.
You don't ask, you don't get, so let's ask. So, thank you. Sean, what's your wish list?
Yeah, if I could be so bold, I'll take funding increases off the table just for the purposes of this response. But something I think that could be very beneficial and powerful just at the federal level is, we've kind of siloed a lot of different investments in infrastructure sources as just about infrastructure, especially when you think about transportation funding, right? We think about that as separate from housing when they're actually deeply interconnected, right? Like the transportation systems that we fund via, in large part with federal dollars, are absolutely essential for achieving production of housing. So that's a place where I could, if I had a wish list, I think I'd put that on there. But beyond that, I also think that expanding opportunities for, things like owning manufactured homes. That's something that you can't really do, right? And that's incentivizing and working on the financial side to make different product types, especially ones that can be constructed far more cheaply than just traditional kind of stick-built development, I think would be very powerful, just as if I'm thinking about a wish list.
Okay, good. Mary Kyle.
Infrastructure funding, simplifying the affordable housing buckets from the federal level. I share the headache when I hear my affordable housing colleagues talk about putting together a stack of funding. The federal government can do a lot to reinforce climate resilient building materials and locations and types in order to prop up some of that insurance market. And then I'll echo what Sean said about transportation dollars. It's not enough to have a home whose mortgage or rent you can pay, but you need to be able to get to your job, get to your school, get around. And being able to get around without owning a car or owning 2 or 3 or driving as far is really critical, especially as we're aging, where, it's a third of our population or more doesn't drive for a variety of reasons, and we cannot afford to isolate folks. So coordinating that, integrating that transportation planning and funding into our communities, particularly our rural communities.
Thank you. Deborah.
I would ask the federal government to encourage the states to look at their zoning. That's going to be the number one way in order for there to be additional housing that's going to be able to be built. In addition, focusing on policies that are going to support homeownership and not just rentals, so we can actually have a wealth building opportunity for our next generation.
So you think incoming President Trump should do an executive order similar to our middle housing bill for the entire country?
Sure.
Okay, there we go. So
I'll do a
Russ.
quick +1 on simplifying federal allocation for affordable housing, but for me, it's the infrastructure, and I'll tell you why. If you want to get housing on the ground fast, the thing that's going to kill a project is your infrastructure requirements, which is an unknown when they come in and they talk to someone at the city. When they come in, they know exactly what the building's going to cost. They know exactly what their site work's going to cost. A lot of times they have no idea what their infrastructure requirements is, and that is the wild card variable on any project. And it also takes the longest amount of time to figure out. We have expansion areas that we're in negotiations with developers for a year to figure out how this is all going to come together, get their traffic studies, do all this stuff, figure it out. The more that you can get the infrastructure funding and be a plug and play type of community where the table is set and they just need to build the building, everything goes super fast. Super easy, super fast. All the knowns are knowns. You can have easy conversations and you can work them through the process as quickly as you can. So that is the why on infrastructure funding at all levels, not just the big stuff. It's, if you drive, as you're going on your tour, I don't know if you're going through the core area, but we have active projects in there to set the table for redevelopment through urban renewal and other things so that because it's really hard when one lot comes in and the road's not fixed. Like, what do you do? How do you do that? Are they going to build the full road in one point? It'd be easier to build the whole road, set the table. They know what they're coming into, and they can make their performance and business decisions a lot easier when they come talk to us.
Yep. And maybe just one last word on infrastructure. I do think the Oregon legislature this past short session did the right thing when they said, we have $100 million, we have specific projects, and we were very clear that those infrastructure dollars have to result in housing. And so I would encourage the legislature again to be like, the reality is every community in the state has aging infrastructure. And that is indeed a problem, and the federal government can help us more there. But as a state, if we have limited amount of dollars to put in infrastructure, we have got to attach it to housing. There's just no way around it. Whether it enhances your system to put more housing, or you're laying new pipe, whatever it is, it has to be connected to new housing because of the urgency of the crisis. So please give a round of applause to our fantastic panel here. And we'll be selling middle housing in Oregon t-shirts soon. So, and I think, Jack, get ready for your tours. Yeah.
And if we can have everyone just stay in their seats, and we'll introduce the mayor.
Yes. And my favorite mayor of the fabulous city of Bend.
All right. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Governor Kotek. We have some remarks next from Mayor Melanie Keebler. Thanks so much for the beautiful weather this week in Bend. And I will let you take it away. Thanks.
All right. Afternoon, everybody. It's great to have you here in Bend. A lot of faces of familiar people I know, and then a lot of people I don't, and folks from other states. We're really glad to have you here on this super important topic. I'm going to keep it short because we want to get to the tour. I just wanted to validate something the governor said when she was talking about seniors, wanting to downsize. I'm a mayor, as the great former HUD director and former mayor Marcia Fudge said, mayors get no peace at the grocery store. So if I'm in a coffee shop, people are going to talk to me, and I did have a couple specifically come to me and say, we want to downsize. Our kids are out. We want to stay here. We cannot find a place that's small that we can afford, right? So it's a very real issue, not just for new neighbors coming in, but for our senior population as well. I just wanted to talk a little bit about just some themes I heard here, and one thing I wanted to mention. One theme with the NIMBYism and the opposition, we have a lot of examples of here in Bend of we built it, and it's okay. We survived, right? The parking is okay, we're managing it, we got a lot of new neighbors, and we're gonna go move on to the next thing. So there's something really powerful about having state leadership that passes the policies that were talked about today, that enables local leadership to do those things and be brave and say, we know that change is scary, there's a lot going on in our city as we grow, but that it's gonna be okay, we're gonna manage the impacts of this, and we're gonna grow and be better as a community because of it. One thing I wanted to point out that, again, just listening to everyone talk up here, I wanted to distill, is that when you introduce political discretion into a land use process and a process of people developing their land and building housing, you are introducing opportunities for discrimination. You are introducing opportunities for politics to come into play, when really what we need is to set a stage of what the parameters are we want, how we want people to build in our communities, and then let people meet those standards, right? So when you introduce that uncertainty, that really also can kill projects. And we've really tried in Bend, in line with the state's policies, to create those clear, objective pathways, right? If you meet these things, you get to build homes in Bend. They're gonna be safe, right? They're gonna meet our code, but we're not introducing whether we like the color of the building or whether people think low-income apartments cause crime, right? Other things that are discriminatory that can get introduced into the system. And I think that's just a theme that we need to think about at the state level across the West and across the country. The other issue I wanted to talk on just really briefly, Governor talked about this being a bipartisan issue. I just want to say for our community, it's an issue that our community buys into and supports their political leadership with. We had an election in November with 4 city councilors running who were very pro-housing. They all won by a large margin. Our community is saying, yes, keep doing what you're doing, put the pedal to the metal, build the homes, create the affordable homes that we need. And so I just want to say that for all the folks who work for governors or talk to city councils. It's a bipartisan issue. Everybody needs a home. Everybody knows someone who's getting priced out of Bend. Everyone has a kid that they maybe are a grandparent or somebody they know that wants to stay here. So we just need to keep having courage in that area. And what we want to do here in Bend is build the homes where people want to work and where they want to live and where they want to play. We want people to be able to live here. So on this tour that we're about to go on, We're going to show you some of those places, especially some innovative ideas, land trusts, really sustainable homes, cottage clusters, the different ideas that we've leaned into here to provide those homes for our workforce and our community, and really excited to show you all that. So thank you again for being here.
Ladies and gentlemen, please meet out at front of the lobby for the 250 bus for the field trip. Thank you.